Salutations, shades, and welcome back to your one-stop shop for all things strange and unusual, talking with shadows. The conversation everyone has, but no one wants to admit to. Here with your host, Vic Whaley.
And Marcus D, and we want to give a shout-out to our two newest patrons, Elizabeth and Oncer Loyal. Welcome to the One Candle family, everyone.
Big hearts, guys. As an interesting side note, Lizzie had once came down and played a game of 40K with us.
It was pretty awesome. It was awesome. Lizzie came down and we played. I played.
You played Orcs,
and you guys played Chaos. So
yes, we played Alpha Legion,
yes.
And totally stomped you.
It wasn't a total stomp, by the way. It was like a 500-point game. Like your HQ took out my HQ, and by that point, that was pretty much the game.
It was a good match, though. It was a good match.
But it was still fun. Thank you very much. And it was not no stompage. But man, it has been a while since we have been back doing an episode. And we apologize about that, guys.
Yeah, I've been just very, very busy with classes, but my classes are starting to get on the downhill. I only got about 3 more months, and then I'm graduated.
And my wife and I are in the process of trying to adopt. And so we just finished our home study. Thank you for.
Sorry, round of applause. I'm very excited.
When it's only one person clapping, that sounds real condescending.
The audience,
just so you know,
the audience was celebrating with me.
You know, there's a button for that, mind you. By the way, hang on, let's see if I can find it.
Let's see what he is. Oh my goodness, you got
on
it on
the first try. Thank you, thank you.
But either way, big congratulations.
Thank you. So we're super excited to that. So then we're done with that. So now it's opened up a lot more time for us to be able to record. So it's super awesome that we've got 2 new patrons. We got more time to record now, so we're super, super excited to be here. And I wanted to get this done earlier in the week, but unfortunately it's been, well, not unfortunately, thankfully it's my anniversary. Sorry, I want to catch myself there on that one. So we had to do that. You know, my wife and I went to this winery, and I'm going to give you guys some advice. If something's price is listed as MKP, don't order it. Because you cannot afford it if you don't know what it was. It was, my wife ordered something that was steak written in some sort of other language, MKP. It was $125.
What was it, Wagyu?
Okay, it was a steak of something. I don't know what it is, but for $125, I assume it was the last of its species. Okay.
Speaking of wine, I've got some homemade mead here for us today.
Yeah,
this is a apple cinnamon mead.
I'm excited and hopefully not going to get fall down drunk from this.
We're only going to give you a little bit because it's around. Most of my meads are around 40 proof, so they're strong.
Apple alcohol is definitely one of my weaknesses.
We named this one A Taste of Chaos after Eris, since we included apples in it. We like to give all the wines kind of a mythology-based name.
A toast to our newest patrons.
Cheers,
and being
guys.
Back in the studio.
Ting.
Ting.
Oh, I like that one.
I like that.
I thought you would. You usually do like. I'm gonna take it back and try to make a sweeter version of it. But as far as apple meads go, I think it's pretty good.
I think it could have had a little bit more of an appley taste to it. I think the cinnamon, it's a little strong, but it's still good. I mean, yeah, I liked it better than the other one you had. I liked it better than the last one that we tried on the episode. I don't think we can bottle this and sell this because we need a liquor license. But
yeah, no, I have no clue what the hoops are to go from a home brewer to actually being allowed to sell stuff. But I'm assuming it's way more work than I want to put in, so I'm just gonna make it for myself.
For what it's self right now, it's just us experimenting in your basement.
Okay, let's get to some comments.
Yeah, so if you guys didn't check out our last 2 episodes, really, in our last episode, we wrapped up talking about the Marine Kingdom and this really long story of a person who got way too deep into that. And so if you haven't seen it, definitely go watch those episodes.
Yeah, and definitely start with the first one because you're going to be lost on the second episode if you don't have the context from the first.
And so WNPR says, I wish you would do a crossover with the Chilluminati podcast, which I did see that comment, and I did reach out to them asking them if they'd like to do a crossover.
I'll have to check out some of their stuff. I don't think I've heard them yet.
Yeah, they're pretty good. I mean, I would say they're a really good podcast and similar to us that does a lot of different like eclectic stuff in the paranormal. I mean, we still do weirder stuff. Don't get me wrong. That's why people listen to us. So, because you get real into the weird paranormal weeds here.
Chilluminati?
Yeah.
Well, Chilluminati, guys, if you're listening, I'm
love
going to be listening to you all week.
Avarice Rex, the Dark Phoenix said, don't get me started on mermaids, the body found. I have a few issues with that show. Personally, I think they were trying to capture the same majesty as dragons, a fantasy made real, and failed.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Oh,
100%
absolutely.
That's what they're trying.
Well, I also get mad, too, because it was the first time that I really actually feel like hardcore fell for a hoax, and it was just proven to be a hoax.
I had initially thought it might have been real when it came out, but as I watched it, there were too many things where, like, I should have heard of this before now.
Yeah, like, you realize it should have been on, like, if we found some sort of sentient species underwater, yeah, it would be on the news. Well, sorry. We assume it would be on the news.
Yeah.
But
Also, Avis Rex was the first person to respond to when I said for our patrons to guess what we're going to be talking about next. The only clue I gave was it's an East Coast cryptid, and got it on the first guess.
Well, it's also like the only East Coast cryptid.
This is far from the only East Coast cryptid.
That we haven't, major one that we haven't done.
Fair enough.
That we haven't done. And, and so
Avis Rex won the boot.
Correct. He did on the first guess. It's because our fans are smarter than everybody else's fans. So I'll say that loudly, proudly. Dan Ward said, I'm back. Hell yeah. Welcome back, Dan. Yeah, I did see that you got back on the Patreon. Welcome back.
Cheers.
Dan Ward, super fan. Once You're Loyal, newest patron, says, as someone who reads biker romance, by the way, that is the greatest start to a sentence that I've ever heard.
I like that.
I agree with Marcus, which makes you, again, smarter than the vast majority of people out there, again. I love this person so much that this story does resemble biker culture. Yeah. The story reminds me of how the church treats Mary Magdalene's story. The whole war of the soul is a trend I saw a lot growing up in a non-denominational church, which was evangelical smashed with Southern Baptist. Yeah, I think I remember we were talking about that through the Marine Kingdom, the biker culture that they used to, I think, was to lure women in and use them to put men in positions of power to help their organization. I think if I remember right, when we were talking about that. So, thank you, Once Low, for saying that. I appreciate that. So today, guys, we are talking about the Jersey Devil. How did it take us like almost 9 years in the paranormal to do a whole episode on the Jersey Devil?
Okay, here's the thing. I was laboring under the assumption that most of the Jersey Devil stuff was kind of talked out, and really that most of our fans would know most of the stuff. And that's why when you first approached me about wanting to do the Jersey Devil for the next episode, I was kind of like, I don't know. But it didn't take long for me to prove myself wrong, because I started digging through and I started finding stuff that I was fully unaware of. So, yeah, no, I'm glad to be talking about this today.
And so I am too. I mean, we do winged cryptids. So many different types of winged cryptids. And the Jersey Devil is like right up there with some of the, the biggies, like the Snallygaster, Mothman, this sort of thing. And I feel bad that it's taken us a minute to get to do the Jersey Devil, especially with how much we've had Ricky Bruckman on here from New Jersey.
Yeah.
And it's taken us a minute, so
we should get him in here and do a month of New Jersey cryptids.
Yes, I would love to get Ricky and Whiskey Conspiracies in here at the same time, since we now have 2 extra mics that we can now hook up at the same time, which is great. Thank you so much to our patrons for helping us support and do that. So, we've actually had a couple people that have asked us to do some interviews. So
yeah, we'll get cooking on some of those soon.
Pretty excited. And so the Jersey Devil in and of itself is a cryptid story that goes back almost 300 years.
A lot of people attribute it to being the earliest American cryptid. Oh yeah, no, I personally go no, it's not. But there are definitely people who attribute it.
I would definitely agree that there are some people who are inaccurate.
Yes,
there are some people who are just flat wrong. So, in a nutshell, I'll go ahead and tell you guys the core story that a lot of people know. If this is the first time that you are crawling, that you have ever heard the story of the Jersey Devil. This Mead is good. So I'm already slurring. So the story starts in 1735. Jane Leeds, who already had 12 children, was pregnant with her 13th child. And on a dark, stormy night, she gave birth to her 13th child. And it was a very difficult, tumultuous labor, and cried out that this child should surely be the devil. And whenever she birthed the child, it was cleaned off, and suddenly, somehow, after cleaning it all off, that's when they discovered and noticed that the child had wings, a horse goat-like head, hooves, these clawed-esque hands. It let out this awful shriek, climbs up the chimney, out the top of the chimney, and flees into the Pine Barrens, to then begin a whole life of terrorizing the East Coast.
Like many early myths of America, what we have here is one of the most common tellings of it. But the thing is, there's so many different tellings of the Jersey Devil.
Sure.
And you'll find like minor changes here and there.
Yeah.
But that's one of the more consistent ones I've heard.
Yeah, like the second most common one that you get is that she was just in on it the whole time, and that she was actually, like, Jane Leeds was a witch, and her husband was really the devil. And so they were intentionally trying to have this, like, monstrous child, and that's what caused it. You'll get that. But essentially, in a nutshell, the first one that I told is the quintessential story of the New Jersey Devil. And so, but up until about the 20th century, it was referred to as the Leeds Devil, to be fair.
Now, I want to take initiative on this because I want to talk about some of the things I was unaware of.
Sure.
First, the Leeds family in New Jersey was a pretty major family, and some of the versions of the story addresses that it's not called the Leeds Devil because it was Mama Leeds that had birthed it, but instead that it had occurred at Leeds Point. And some stories say it's both. It was by a Mama Leeds at Leeds Point. One of the things that, like, I ended up finding as I researched this is there's this whole rabbit hole that involves Benjamin Franklin
and it was in Titus Leeds. Yeah.
Okay, so here's one of the things I did not know is before the Poor Richard's Almanac, which was considered to be one of the first major American almanacs, there was actually a Leeds Almanac. Right. It was produced by Daniel Leeds. He was a Quaker. And
he wasn't a very good Quaker.
He
wasn't a good Quaker.
So he produces the Leeds Almanac, and, well, there's a lot of astral charts in it and stuff, and a lot of the Quakers felt that it was a little occulty.
Yeah.
Although he tried to retract and apologize for those parts, they were already at the point of burning his books and ready to drive him out of town. So we have this very early occult association with the Leeds family, with people finding his first almanac to be too occulty for the Americas. Well, he goes on, he continues to publish the almanac, and he eventually does pass it on to his son, Titan Leeds. Well, by the time Titan Leeds is taking it over and continuing to work on the almanac, he now has a competitor, the legendary Poor Richard's Almanac.
Oh.
And do you know offhand who did the Poor Richard's Almanac?
I believe that would be Mr. Franklin.
That would be one Benjamin Franklin.
No, and not only that, like, Titan actually, like, one of the things that I do know about that Titan's Almanac, when he was doing that, is after his father passed away and Titan took it over, he doubled down on doing even more of the esoteric stuff in his particular almanac, which I'm sure by this point, if they had not already been kicked out of the Quaker community, it might be the time that's going to happen.
They burnt the bridges already. They weren't going to be rebuilt. Might as well lean into it at this point. Well, Benjamin Franklin's a wit. He's a bit of a trickster. He's a bit of a funny guy. I think most of us kind of know this about the founding father. And he decided to start poking fun at the Leeds Almanac, and particularly at Titan Leeds. At one point, he publishes a death date for Titan Leeds, making a prediction that Titan will die on this day. This hit a nerve with Titan Leeds, who got very upset and started publicly refuting him, calling him a fool, calling him all sorts of names, refuting him within his almanac. And Benjamin Franklin came up with a excellent jab back and our second occult connection with the Leeds family. He started saying, these awful things that Titan Leeds is saying, that this can't be true. My dear, kind Titan Leeds would never say this sort of thing about me. He must be possessed. And from then on, would not refer to Titan Leeds anymore as Titan Leeds, but the ghost of Titan Leeds, or the ghost possessing Titan Leeds.
I would like to personally take this opportunity to congratulate Benjamin Franklin on being one of the earliest gaslighting champions of all time.
It was definitely a alpha troll move right there.
Yes.
Because it really got under his skin. And he carried this on for a long time.
Yeah.
He actually carried this on past the death of Titan Leeds.
Yeah, and I mean, if there was one thing that happened in like colonial America that happened a lot, it would be these rich, affluent guys who would take out all of these like newspaper articles where they would just throw jabs at each other all the time and just make up just crazy crap about each other. I'm glad that we've moved past that in America. that we no longer have these massive mass communication platforms to be able to take jabs at the people that we don't like. Mr. Baggins.
We have a whole thing I'm wanting to cover on the whole Baggins thing. I think that deserves a whole episode on the worst Hobbit. Mm-hmm. But yeah, no, it's clearly not enough for people that powerful to have a rivalry in private.
Correct.
Everyone has to be drawn into it.
Correct.
Okay, so we have the first connection of the first almanac being occulty, quote unquote, and people reacting to it. We have the second occult connection with the Leeds family, with this whole ghost of Titan Leeds, although it's much more tongue-in-cheek, but definitely something that would have been known in the New Jersey area and could have affected the local folklore. We actually have one more, and it's a little bit of a surprising connection, but are you familiar with the Leeds family crest? Mm-hmm. What are there three of on the Leeds family crest?
There are 3 wyverns.
Yes, there's 3 winged creatures that look fairly Jersey devilish on the crest. I've heard them being interpreted as griffins, dragons, and wyverns, but most commonly as wyverns. Wyverns being if you've ever seen the Welsh flag, it's the quote-unquote dragon on the Welsh flag, although there are notable differences between dragons and wyverns, but they are like woefully esoteric, and I'm not going to get into them just yet. So we have like those 3 already existing connections with occultism and loosely the Jersey Devil. One possibility is that, and a lot of people have pointed this out, is that this is a clear sign that this was just, there was already folklore connected to it, and it was just made up as a rumor about the Leeds family. Now that's the part I don't buy. Having a pre-existing occultic connection and then a occultic action happening does not lead to me, therefore it was made up.
Right.
Now, one of the interesting things is because this is a big area for iron production. And one of the things I was very curious on wyverns is there connections between wyverns and iron? Because often when you dig into mythology involving dragons, there's usually connections with metals. Like sometimes it's steel, sometimes it's gold, sometimes it's just precious things they hoard. Dragon mythology goes all over the world, and it can be a little complicated. Guess what I found out?
What?
There is no connections between wyverns and iron.
I was sitting there waiting to talk about like how intertwined the American steel industry is up in the Northeast. Wow, thanks. That balloon just got deflated.
Like I did a lot of time diving into the folklore of wyverns because in many ways you could draw a lot of similarities between wyverns and the Jersey Devil. And I was really hoping to find that because there are several stories where he shows up around iron.
Right.
But I couldn't find the connection.
Right.
But I did find something else that, although a bit tangential, very interesting. Because if you notice, a lot of these East Coast cryptids are very strange. They're very bizarre. Just some of the weirdest cryptids, like
as opposed to a not weird, bizarre cryptid.
For example, the snallygaster and the Jersey Devil have a much more bizarre appearance than many other like cryptids. Like, sure, there's other strange cryptids out there, but you'd be hard pressed to find something as strange as, like, say, the snallygaster. Like I said, they're out there, but they're not as common in American folklore. Something I did find about wyverns, though, is this. There are some stories that say the wyvern pollutes the land just by its very existence. And through that spiritual pollution that sinks into the world around where it exists, strange and bizarre creatures begin to be birthed out of the earth. So I know this is a bit tangential, but we do have an area where some very bizarre cryptids are showing up in that time period. We have a family with the crest of the wyverns on it. We have the appearance in that time period of the Jersey Devil. One could associate with the wyvern. And yes, like I said at the beginning, this is a very tangential connection, but I found it a fascinating enough idea that I had to bring it up here. Perhaps maybe the Leeds family's association with occultism was maybe more founded. Maybe they have this association with the wyvern's mystical ability to create monsters. Well, maybe the Jersey Devil itself was a wyvern and could have been the birthing of these other things. Or maybe I read too deep into wyvern folklore and I'm seeing connections that don't exist.
Well, I don't think that necessarily that you're seeing connections that don't necessarily exist. I also think, like, if you think about, like, just the time period and where we're at, we're only 40 years after the Salem witch trials. So, I mean, you're talking about the people that are the ones talking about this are literally the children of the Salem witch trial era. So these are people that are used to just seeing some of this occultism and then just using that as a means of just demonizing people just around them.
Yes.
And let's keep in mind that Daniel Leeds, that put this almanac out, wasn't the most popular gentleman, by the way, of the time with the Quaker community.
No. Because
we're also only about 40 years before the American Revolution. And at the time, he was a surveyor for the British monarchy at the time. So it's not so on top of him being this gentleman who's using this, who's using astrology, using these occultic things in his almanac to already make people dislike him, he's also a loyalist at the same time. So it's just stacking up why people would want to vilify him and his family at the time.
Like, I'm actually not that against the idea that this is mainly just people hating the Leeds family. Mm-hmm. I just don't like jumping to that being the only conclusion.
No. I'm not. I think that it's a point to talk, and I'll go a little bit deeper into that concept. I think a little bit when we're giving some more of our thoughts on it. But
another angle I wanted to talk about on this subject is this: the Jersey Devil, although was a popular story during that time period, it was much later, I believe, during the 20s when the story really started to take off. In, like, say,
in the
local...
in the 20th century?
Well, I think it's the 1920s was when the story really started to take off, isn't it?
Well, it was 1909.
No, sorry, 1909. Sorry, my bad.
It was the 20th century, but it was 1909 when you have essentially the Jersey Devil week, when you see it go from being the Leeds Devil to being referred to as the Jersey Devil.
But there's also the possibility of this. What is being seen is not directly connected to the story of the Leeds Devil.
Yeah, that's true.
If you have a pre-existing folkloric thing, even if it never happened, you just have this idea of this rumor of a monster in the area that just pre-exists, and then something strange shows up. The association is going to be made, but that doesn't necessarily mean A then B is correct here.
Right.
One of the things I noticed in both the original Jersey Devil story and the later ones that show up is the horse head description. Mm-hmm. And that's not the only time we get the horse head description in, like, cryptid sightings.
Sure.
Many people struggling to identify creatures that we would now identify as prehistoric creatures often describe it as having a horse-like head. These are people, they don't have a extensive modern biological background.
Well, it's something with like that elongated face.
So I also wonder if maybe there's no occultic connection truly existing here. If perhaps they have found a relic, something from the pterosaur family.
Yeah.
And then imprinted it onto this thing. Because the description, if you think about how someone without a advanced biological degree may describe it, I mean...
Well, it's also dark when people are... So, you know, if
they're mainly not taxonomous.
Right. So you're talking about people in the New England area, okay? Not really seeing, I would say, large reptiles at the time, like something like an alligator or something, or lizards. In the dark, seeing something with an elongated face. I would imagine, you know, people have used the phrase kangaroo as well, but I even have a hard time believing that just the average person is just going to throw the phrase kangaroo out. I think horse is probably the best analogy in shape that you could guess of something like in the dark.
Also, like another interesting connection going back through the discussions we've had so far, the wyvern is described as having this kind of precisely pointed tail.
Mm-hmm.
In more modern interpretations, it's been reimagined as a scorpion tail, but it's really more of just it's a pointed tail.
Correct.
You have the description continuing over to the Jersey Devil story, with even some of them drawing a special connection to it in the birth of the Jersey Devil, using its pointed tail to whip each and every person who had helped in the birth before it flew away. And many pterosaurs have this odd membranous, somewhat pointed tail. It's not a direct connection of proof, but it's once again it's a series of details that I noted in the story that continued to carry over.
Let me give you something to help. I think that'll help strengthen the argument about it being possibly more of just being an elongated tail and not necessarily being like a wyvern-esque tail, just an elongated tail. Mm-hmm. Imagine any sort of folktale story involving something with a scorpion-like tail. It always uses its tail, or that particular trait is equipped in the story. Can you name any single story that you have ever heard involving the Jersey Devil where it stung somebody?
Oh, none.
Exactly.
It whips it with the tail. But what I was pointing out is the wyvern with the scorpion tail is not part of traditional mythology as I know it.
But any time where that particular trait is involved in something, it would use that in some sort of, that's a trait of it, so it's going to be used in the story. It's never involved in any Jersey Devil story that I've ever heard.
Yeah, and which makes sense because it's a modern conjecture. It's like, for those of you who play D&D and have fought wyverns, you would know nowadays when we talk about wyverns, they usually have a scorpion tail.
I wasn't going to say.
But it's not something that's present in the mythology. Yeah. It's something that we've made up to make them more interesting monsters to fight.
Right.
I just want to make sure people aren't conflating the kind of more modern D&D-esque wyvern with the earlier interpretation of the word, which are not overly consistent. Like, for example, mythology usually describes the wyvern as having 2 legs and the other arms being the wings, kind of like a Skyrim dragon. Mm-hmm. But the Welsh flag definitely shows it with 4 legs. So, but at that, more consistently than that is the pointed tail.
Right.
Because that does remain more consistent than the number of legs.
Right. Well, if you want to make it like this, I think that there is definitely something within the American mythos about these pterosaur-esque type creatures sightings that people see. And so I do think an argument could be made that something could be being misidentified about the Jersey Devil. But you were talking about the week of in 1909, and this is really when there's this big change in the Jersey Devil story. If you're chronologically laying this all out. 1909, so it's January 16th to January 23rd, 1909, and there are hundreds of reported sightings all across the Northeast at the time at this time about people seeing something described like the Jersey Devil. You have it report flat out attacking a trolley in Henton Heights. Police are shooting at the damn thing in Bristol, Pennsylvania at the time. There's sightings of it in Delaware. There's sightings of it in Maryland during this time, all over just news cycles everywhere. And now when I see that, yeah, we talked about this is the time in which it goes from being kind of referred to as the Leeds Devil to being referred to as the New Jersey Devil. That's also a time in history, though, when you see this massive spike in news reportings for a lot of cryptids, like around this time period. Like, this is the same time period in which you have, like, the Van Meter monster reported sightings. There's other pterosaur sightings, by the way, during this time, too, as well. Bigfoot sightings that did, like, just shoot up around this time, too.
Van Meter monster, another East Coast real bizarre creature.
Now, also at the same time, let's keep in mind, this is only a couple decades right after the Fiji mermaid. And so this is the time in which it is popular for a lot of newspapers to start hyping up stories as a way of selling newspapers during this time. Because, you know, they're writing the most outlandish thing that they can. And so that's kind of the hard thing that I have about this particular time. But you see some pretty cool stuff like during this time, like two different groups of people offering like $10,000. Like the Philadelphia Zoo offers $10,000 for its capture, which I think is pretty interesting.
Can I derail for a small moment here?
Sure.
It's somewhat connected. Okay, I found references to groups of bounty hunters and adventure seekers showing up in the area.
Yeah.
But I found no information on what happened with them once they got there, just that they were there. Now, did you find anything? Because this was something I was curious about, but I just had come up dry on the
bounty hunters from what they found. I didn't find anything about what they had found when they were in the area. But also keep in mind, the Pine Barrens has also been a long time associated with social outcasts.
Oh, yeah.
At
Ricky
the time.
Bruckman has told me rumors of the blue people that supposedly live out in the Pine Barrens and stuff.
Like supposedly like gangsters. Gangsters, moonshiners, runaway free slaves at the time would end up in the Pine Barrens, they said, would end up in that time period. And so, yeah, I mean, roaming gangs of armed individual is not something that's outside the scope of American history.
And they definitely have a history of it, because if you go back before this period, this was a serious area for like highwaymen, like gangs of bandits, things like that. It's historically just been a rough area to live. Beyond that, like, it's very similar to a tundra in that area. It's that arid and that cold. So it's just not an easy place to be.
It shocks me, though, that there are not more accounts of these roaming gangs of people showing up in the Pine Barrens and finding something. Because also on top of the Pine Barrens, supposedly being the home place of the Jersey Devil, it's also the home place of like a gazillion other types of paranormal creatures as well. You're talking about, there's tons of different ghost stories that involve there. Bargeisters showing up in there. There's like a ghost of a pirate that supposedly buried his treasure out there in the Pine Barrens that's out there.
I must say there's myths of like smoke dogs and witch storms in that area too.
I think like white lady type stories that show up there and there as well. But not one particular instance of any like gang of individuals that have stories from. Now my guess is they might exist and we just don't know about them.
Well, the other thing is, when I was really interested in the stories of these bounty hunters, I was thinking about the Infield horror case. And remember how like we had some information in the Infield horror case from like these bounty hunters and things like that who had come in to hunt the monster. But the Infield horror happened much more recently. This might be just something that's buried too far back in the annals of time.
No, but you also have things like that we know is a hoax where gangs of people showed up, like Hodag.
Oh, I love Hodag.
Yeah, where, they show up and they fabricate the story of using dynamite and all this other sorts of crap to hunt it down.
And have an amazing picture of them killing Hodag.
Or pterosaurs. That's another thing, too, that where they, like, down in the south, southwest, where you saw the same thing. I don't see any stories out of the Pine Barrens, and that kind of shocks me, which makes me think that I believe that they're there because they've happened for far less, and I think these are stories that probably are overlooked. Well, so my guess is that they're there.
There was one attempt to turn in a bad piece of taxidermy for the bounty.
That was a kangaroo.
Yeah, and it was a really badly done. Like, it's one of those things you look at and go, you made this at home, didn't you?
Yeah.
It was terrible.
It was another one of the Fiji mermaid. They need to hit up Barnum to how to do that right.
My guess is one of the things that made it look so bad is there's not that many living animals nowadays with like that sort of large membranous wing. But they did a bad job.
Right. But I think if we're trying to push the conversation of the New Jersey Devils somewhere, I think that's where it's going to come from. I think that there's probably going to be weird, interesting stories from these gangs of adventurers showing up to go hunt this thing down in the Pine Barrens and running into weird adventures out there. That's my guess.
And it's not like this isn't a continuing thing. It's not that uncommon for people to have encounters with the Jersey Devil up to this day.
Absolutely. Oh man, I was watching a documentary talking about one of the former of the mayor of the county, Galway County out there, Don Purdy, where they were like in the car with him and he's driving around and he's like, "Yep, this is the home of the New Jersey Devil. It's a real great place. People spot it all the time." And he's like super excited. I'm like, if I'm a mayor of a small town and I think that there may be something plaguing my town and harassing, I don't want my elected officials to be that devil may care about it. Like, I at least want you to pretend like you're upset. Okay.
This is where we see the monster that flies around the town. I don't plan on doing nothing about it, but this is where you can see it.
It's like, vote for me next November. Status quo. Like, I don't know what kind of campaign pitch that is. Like, I imagine like his opponent had to be like, I'm going to hunt that New Jersey Devil down. And I'm going to be the one to tax it up. Like, even if you tried, I feel like that would be a better campaign strategy than just being proud of this is yep, my town's being harassed by this thing and I'm not doing a damn thing about it.
It is a really unique case because it does occur over a long period of time. I would assume that if it is a biological entity that's not supernatural in nature, it would have to be like a breeding community. Like, for example, if we're examining this as a pterosaur, I would have to assume that there's a breeding community of them around for it to persist this long over time.
I mean, assuming it's a biological entity.
Now, if it's a supernatural entity, and you can draw connections to quite a few different supernatural entities when examining the Jersey Devil. It has comparisons to the ancient chimera if you've cut up off two heads. Like, it doesn't have like the three heads of the chimera, but it does have one of them. The goat is one of the traditional ones of the heads.
We talked about having that elongated head. There's an indigenous group called the Lenape that live in the area that have a spiritual entity called the Imsing. I think I pronounced that right. That I found, but
Lenape words are actually really hard.
I'm doing my best. Okay, I'm doing my best. And they described this spiritual creature as something with bat-like wings, with a deer head, with another creature with an elongated like type face, bat-like wings, and also has hooves.
Also, if you run into any supernatural American Indian creature that has a deer head, just go. It's never good.
No, it's not good.
The deer head's like one of the worst things to run into.
Well, what was it?
And owls.
I saw this in the documentary that I watched on this. It's not like anybody who describes this thing has a positive experience about it. I think there are people that have dumb takes on it. Like there was this one lady that was the daughter of an eyewitness, and she said, "Well, I think this thing is just a misunderstood creature that's out there that's scared and just looks different." And I'm like, lady, that is how you die. like I don't think that it's actually harmed anybody. I'm like, man, there are hundreds of missing persons that are up there in the Northeast that we just don't know. That probably go missing even in the Pine Barrens. Thank you very much.
I'm not gonna lie, because this is just the personality I am. If I run into it, I get over my initial shock of seeing it and it's acting friendly. I'm totally going to explore that possibility.
That it might be friendly.
I'm just that sort of person where if I get over my initial shock, I'm going to at least test the waters to see, hey, you're giving me this opportunity. Can you talk? Are you nice? Or it's probably just going to lure me in close enough to like kill me.
Do you just get over your initial shock of the strange man in the van that just offers candy to you?
No.
After you get over the initial shock, maybe the candy's real.
I have less faith in a human trying to give me candy than like a monster that's out in the wilderness. But you know me, I'm kind of just one of those people who's like, I'm willing to consider maybe you're just misunderstood. Maybe we've given you a rough shake, and that's why it's going to eat me. It's going to get my heart.
Yeah, I also feel like this might be the reason why you're like the first person to die in a horror movie. Because of this.
100%. I'm the first person going down in the horror movie.
No, I'm not.
Well, one reason is I'm also a survivalist. You have to kill early the people who actually have the skills to get someone out of a situation. The writer of the universe had to write a fatal flaw into me.
So I wanted to ask you about one of the traits that we've gone 40 minutes and we really haven't brought up this weird trait, and I don't think enough people talk about this blood curdling scream that it makes.
Yes, I want to talk about this.
Yeah, I want to talk about this in some of the fundamentals that we have, because you hear about that at the earliest stages of it, and there's a couple accounts of some people talking about it. And I'm curious as to what some of your thoughts on that might be. Like, do you think that it's a supernatural thing? Do you think we just look just as horrifying to it and it's screaming?
Do you mind if I go first?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I have two thoughts on this. I'm going to go with the less interesting and work to the more interesting. The first one I want to talk about is, if it is a pterosaur-like creature, it's going to have a large screech because it's going to be communicating over a long range, assuming that they are semi-social, which seems like they might be. So it would make sense that it would have this loud scream to communicate. Also, it's totally something that many animals use in self-defense situations. If it feels threatened or it feels like it needs to shock a prey item, it might utilize something like that. So I think it does make some sense with the pterosaur. But I want to draw attention to something else that I've been thinking about a lot this week while I've been doing this research. We have a creature with wings. We have a creature with red glowing eyes. It has a horrific, powerful shriek that really seems to screw up people who hear it. What's this kind? Oh, and it's dark colored. What does this kind of sound like?
Oh, and red glowing eyes.
I said red glowing eyes.
Oh, you already did the red. Yeah. That we're going down the Mothman rabbit hole.
Yeah, no, like, I really think that this might be the same sort of creature as the Mothman. Now, one of the hurdles we have to get over is it is described as leaving cloven hoof footprints. I don't recall ever seeing that in any of the Mothman cases.
Sure.
And I am prepping to read Mothman Prophecies by John Keel right now, so it might just be on my mind. But I really feel like it's either a similar sort of entity or possibly the same entity. So, like, that's kind of where my mind goes when it comes to the Scream, is it's drawing me more into this kind of bizarre phantom sort of area. Also, many areas where the Jersey Devil sighted are sites of tragedy because it shows up around a lot of battlefields, sometimes even before the battle occurs. What's your thoughts on it?
I've said time and time again that I think something about these winged cryptids has something to do with the possibility of there being more types of skinwalkers out there than just down in the American Southwest. Down there, I've said it numerous times. Occultic practices span the globe, and I think that you see pops-ups of these winged-esque humanoids, or these other humanoid cryptids, all over America. And I 100% believe that I think that an individual can both do this inadvertently and inadvertently. So I think that could be something better to say too, to also address of, how come we haven't found a body? How come, why have we not found a body? There's got to be more than one. This sort of type of deal.
And to the best of my ability to figure out, every continent has a equivalency of the skinwalker.
Sure.
Like, if you dig far enough, you'll find something very similar everywhere.
Right.
Causing some people to use the term fleshgate instead of skinwalker.
Well, you also have, again, we're 40 years after a huge occultic scare across the Northeast with the Salem witch trials at the same time.
And it even occurred in Europe, and it went way more hardcore in Europe. Like, the witch trials in America were nothing compared to, like, say, the ones in central Germany.
Right. And so I think one of the things that we know of, whenever you have a persecuted people, one of the things that will happen is many of them will go underground.
Oh, of course.
So you see, like,
I mean, if I'm a witch during the witch
yeah.
trials, I'm not sticking around.
No, yeah, you're gonna
there.
go. You're gonna go underground, and so I think that that's something that I think that people can that can happen. So, but that's pretty much kind of my food for thought on that. I mean, unless we want to like get into like the common misidentified things of it being like the great horned owl or the sandhill crane, which are like the usual suspects that people bring up all the time.
Let me throw out one more connection.
Sure.
When I was going through some of the early versions of the Leeds birthing the Jersey Devil case, there are some of the descriptions of the story that lean very into like European witchcraft, these sort of things that details that were identified like in the Malleus Maleficarum, things like that. And like not every version of the tale leans so hard in on those descriptions, and maybe they were implanted in later on. But there are some that lean very heavy on the Leeds being a very traditional European witchy family. And I just wanted to address that those details did exist within there.
And so I think that we've talked a lot about, we've talked a lot about the Jersey Devil, and I want to leave some stuff for the pillow talk that we haven't really brought up. But what are some of your final thoughts on the story of the Jersey Devil?
Okay, my final thoughts are at two extremes. Like, either it's a biological creature that has somehow survived similar to a pterosaur that perhaps existed in a relic population for a period of time, probably disappearing or extremely drawing back before the modern day. Or we're talking about a Mothman-esque sort of phantasmal creature where, yes, it does appear biological at initial look, but when you apply the laws of biology to it, it just doesn't make sense and would flatly fall in a supernatural realm. I'm of those two minds on this case. I feel like it's either A or B. What about you?
I think that the popularity and rise of the Jersey Devil sightings, I think, are very suspect around the time of the rise of mass communications periods in America. You know, you're seeing 1930s, early 20th century, and I think that is something to remember, because also during these two periods of time, in which were some of the most fictionalized times in American media. There's bazillions of 20th century hoaxes that early 20th that pop up around then. I mean, you can just everything horrible imaginable could be said in New England papers around this time too as well. I think those are important things to remember. That being said, I do think this is another type of account where you have these winged-esque creatures that pop up through American folklore, and I don't think that you can ignore that. I think that it is a large rock on a much larger pile of large rocks that I think that when you look at it through the whole scope of things, make some really interesting connections and possibilities.
Very poignant and well put point.
Yeah.
But it does lead me to one last question.
What?
Now that you've had a bit, what do you think of the Mead?
Well, I think it's very good, and I'll give some of my final critiques of it in the Pillow Talk segment.
Okay, we're holding the alcohol review off then. Thank you guys so much. This has been a blast to talk about.
Tell us what you guys think about the New Jersey Devil. Was there something about the story that we missed? Was there an account that we kind of glossed over that you guys think we should have looked more at?
Oh, certainly.
I know there was. There were several famous people that have said sightings of this thing.
We didn't even talk about Napoleon's brother.
I know. Yeah. But I've got points for that for the Pillow Talk. What are your thoughts on the Jersey Devil? Do you think it's its own thing? Do you think it's grouped with a bunch of other things? Like, what are your guys' thoughts on it? Put your thoughts in the comments below. If you're listening to this, leave us a like somewhere. Leave us a review. If you're listening to somewhere where you can leave a review, that's always helpful. But until next time, guys, keep believing.
Because we'll keep listening.
All right, everyone, we're going to slide into the Pillow Talk segment of this podcast. If you want to check out the rest of this awesome podcast, all you got to do is go over to our Patreon and sign up. For as little as $1 a month, you get the rest of this awesome podcast, as well as bonus content that we put up exclusively for our patrons. and I'm gonna give you my review on this mead. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. You know what's weird? As I drink it more, I taste the cinnamon less and less, and I get more of the mead. I don't know if I'm getting used to it, or I don't know if I'm just being conditioned to.
It's because it's kind of a in between space between a dry and a sweet, and you get less of that dry taste the more you drink.
That's good. That's a good way to describe it. It's in between dry and sweet.
Yeah, like I actually prefer sweet meads, and I'm getting better at making sure my meads turn out sweet. Like I did a